if you are a container shop and you have Kubernetes, we're going to save you 50, 60, sometimes 70% of your cloud bill without making any commitments up front. And we're doing that all through automation, machine learning, AI, and other sets of heuristics.
Welcome to the My Future Business Show, where we get you in front of your best audience and keep you there. Not only are we interviewing the biggest names in business to help you become even more successful, we're inviting you to book your spot on the show to help you grow your business. So at the end of the call, make sure you fill in the interview application form at myfuturebusiness.com/interviews. Hi and welcome back to the My Future Business Show. You know what? I'm the luckiest person alive because I have the opportunity to host this show, and I'd just like to say thank you for that opportunity because we've done a lot of work to get here, and your feedback is making all the difference. In fact, it's making all of the difference knowing that the show is making a difference for you. Now, on today's show, I'm speaking with the wonderful Leon Kuperman. How are you, Leon?
Hey, Rick. Good to be with you. Nice to start this conversation.
Yes, fantastic to have you here. Now, we're obviously going to be talking about your work at Cast, and you are the co-founder and CTO at CastAI, and we're going to be talking about, obviously, AI, cloud automation, and the benefits of using this particular technology to power your business. But before we do any of that, Leon, and talk about your team and all the rest of it, it's customary for us to learn a little bit about you and your journey as it was leading up to where you are today. So where are we calling in from today?
So I'm in the lovely Toronto, Canada. It'll be a little lovelier in a couple of weeks when the green starts to sprout.
Are you like a cold weather person or a warm weather person?
I am a warm weather person, and I'm here under duress, but getting used to it.
You say here. Is that not home for you? Where is home for you?
So Toronto is home for us. It's home for my family, and I grew up here in Toronto. And we recently moved back here from Los Angeles during COVID to be closer to our my parents and family. But I did have to give up the sunny and beautiful weather.
No. So you talked about growing up in Toronto. What was that like? What can you recall as you grew up? What's one thing you can remember?
So I have a very I'm an immigrant child. I was actually born in a city called Odessa that's in the Ukraine. I was only 4 when we moved so I really grew up through that kind of immigrant upbringing. Parents didn't really speak English at home, and so it was a very interesting childhood. I was very drawn to electronics and computers at an early age. So like from the age of 8 or 9, even as the first PC started coming around,
yes.
I knew this is what I want. Like, it's that young Sheldon episode where Radio Shack for me was the treat. Like if my folks could take me to the mall at Radio Shack, that was the happiest day for me.
Absolutely, and I can tell you do love technology. You've got the latest Beats headset on there. I love it. Technology is something that we all love, and it's really taking over the world. And it's almost omnipresent, isn't it?
Absolutely, it's been proliferating for a long time, and then this is we're at an interesting inflection point of acceleration, and depending on kind of the geopolitics of the world and how our supply chain kind of unravels back to normal, we could see even further acceleration.
Given the fact that computers could take up the majority of my life and they actually form part of my hobby base, I'm wondering, is it the same for you, or do you have other hobbies and things you like to do, given that you live in such a beautiful place?
So I do have physical hobbies. I think are the kind of for folks that are like knowledge workers and using their mind all day long. I think it's really important to have a lot of physical activity. So I practice this martial art called Brazilian Jujitsu.
Yes.
If you're familiar with it,
the Gracies, absolutely. Who doesn't know the Gracies?
That's right. So I train under my professor in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. They didn't call them senseis; they call them professors. Mm-hmm. So my professor's a guy named Jean Jacques Machado, is a world champion. He's the cousin of the Gracies. They kind of grew up together. Fascinating to hear those childhood stories.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, discipline plays a large part of martial arts. I know a bit about this, given I've trained for more than a decade myself, and you have to stick with it. And do you think that I guess that discipline has helped you in business?
It absolutely has, and it's helped me as a stress relief valve. They're in business. There are days that just don't go your way, and being able to get onto the mat and exert yourself in a way that you come off with a completely clear head. I've been doing this particular martial arts since 2012. So,
Mhm.
and I've managed to get to a brown belt level, which is pretty good in this
Congratulations.
form.
Yeah.
Thank you. So now I'm just working for that next level, and that's going to involve some competition as well.
Excellent. Now, do you find that this is less traditional a format?
It is a less traditional format. Part of it is there's really no ranking system. It's up to your
Mm.
professor to kind of decide on when you're ready emotionally, mentally. Like,
Yeah.
there are a few belts, and you really can't ask when you're ready or not. So it's untraditional from that perspective.
Excellent. Now, do you have time away from even the mat and, sitting with family and friends, watching movies? What's your thing? What do you like to do in your downtime?
I like to read. I'm like a nightly reader,
Hmm.
and it's a combination of science fiction and nonfiction, and I love both equally.
Do you like the Star Wars trilogy at all?
So I find the Star Wars trilogy interesting from the perspective of the origin story, and I don't know if you're a Star Wars fan
Oh,
or
I
not, but
absolutely am.
I recently reread Dune after the movie came out,
Oh, yeah.
and have you noticed the parallels in Dune? Like you have the
Yes.
Sand Planet, like there's a spice trade. I think that a lot of it was borrowed from the original Dune stories.
I love the word borrowed. I wonder if there's an original thought left in our collective bodies.
Absolutely.
Now, do you like audiobooks? Do you ever, dive into an audiobook?
All the time, right? So it's half reading and half audio to kind of save the eyes.
Now, I don't know if you're like me, but we love pets. We've always had pets, and we've actually got three Rottweilers at the moment. Do you like pets? Do you have any?
So I had a American Cocker Spaniel for
Oh,
many years, for 12 years, and unfortunately he passed away
uh-huh.
just recently. And our little one, I have three children, and our littlest one really wanted a pet in the house during COVID, and so I am the proud pen owner of Oreo the rabbit, and he just runs around here in my
Oh well,
workspace all day long.
yeah, they're great to have. I had a rabbit one time. That was years ago. I don't remember it. They're quite fun to have, aren't they?
Oreo's totally chill. He just hangs out beside me, watches me work, and we cuddle every once in a while.
Now, let's shift gears a little bit. I know that when we're growing up, there's a lot of people on the show that like this part of the call because they get some insight about the importance of having, I guess, people around us as we're growing through those formative years. Do you have anybody in your life, Leon, that you can recall that almost acted like a mentor in your life? Could be a family, a friend, or colleague.
Yeah, I think early on in life, it was kind of my brother and my dad and my mom, because of the way we arrived to Canada as immigrants, right? They were really kind of forced down the entrepreneurial path. You can't really get a traditional job when you come to the country. You don't have the formal education or the language, etc. So you're busy like learning all of these things, learning the culture, and entrepreneurship is often the best way to make a living, just having a small business. So I watched them kind of toil and work through that process. And early on, because of that observation, I really convinced myself that I not only did I have a passion for technology, I wanted to apply that kind of in an entrepreneurial spirit and create something of my own. So those are like my family
Mm-hmm.
specifically are three important mentors for me. And then as I progressed through my career, I've had different
Different
mentors, and
people, yeah.
they've come at different levels of sophistication, and sometimes, but I think it is really important to have an active mentorship program where you surround yourself with people that you can actively learn from and ask them for their time, because often if you don't ask, you're not going to get the mentors you want. But I think the most successful folks have gone out and actively seek the mentor that they want to connect with.
Do you remember? I mean, I don't know if it was the same for you, but I remember having this purest of pure entrepreneurial spirit when I first started going door to door. This sense of self belief that I can knock on people's door and say, "Hey, look, if you give me $5, I'll wash your car." Did you ever have that type of experience? What was your first entrepreneurial exposure?
Oh boy, I did that with news. I did that with news. So I started working. Probably they would only allow kids to start working at 11 or 12 nowadays. I don't
Nowadays,
know,
no.
but I started working in restaurants as a short order cook, and then I delivered newspapers. And then my first probably pure kind of individual kind of entrepreneur where I, kind of created
Yep.
was buying old computers. So these are like really old, beat up, shabby things. I'd bring them home. I'd take them apart. Like these
Pentium.
keyboards would be all, yeah. I'd clean them up, put them in the newspaper because we didn't have online at that time, and put them
Mhm.
in classified ads and sell them for whatever $100 profit. And that was kind of my first business.
Yeah, wow. And and that's never left you, this entrepreneurial spirit, because you've obviously gone on to co-found the business that you're in, which we're going to obviously pivot to in a moment. But I wonder, let's talk about a day for you. You must have a disciplined day. Do you get up early? Are you an early riser? What's a day look
Yeah,
like for you?
most of my engineering team is in Europe, and we can talk a little bit about why that is.
Yeah.
So I do get up fairly early. A lot easier in California to get up at 6:30, I got to tell you. But yes, I try to get up at around 6:30, and I do the most mind challenging tasks as early as possible in the day, and that includes like design meetings and product reviews. All of those things kind of happen first thing in the morning.
So do you think it's important to know yourself in terms of, I guess, your circadian rhythm, whether or not you're a morning person? Do you get a burst of energy late in the afternoon? And if you do you take advantage of it? Do you monitor yourself like that?
Yeah, I do. I do not personally have a great boost of it. I take a nap in the afternoon, like at
Yep.
2, 3 o'clock. I have to sleep for 30 minutes, and then I get my boost of energy from that point. But some people can plow through the entire day. The other thing that I do to kind of keep my mental clarity at peak for as long as possible is I do this thing called intermittent fasting. So I usually don't eat until far into the afternoon. And I try to limit that to a 3 to 4 hour window. It doesn't work for everyone. Some people have sugar lows, but for me, it's a very healthy way of keeping my ketones up and keeping my body weight down, and also keeping my mind clear.
Loving this call, loving the insights. That's where I think a lot of the power of this call comes from. Now, I want to talk about a little bit about risk and risk management. How important is it to understand the concept of risk as an entrepreneur? And can you recall one of the first times that you had to, I guess, manage it yourself? And what did it feel like for you? And how did you get through it?
Yeah, I think as an entrepreneur, if you stop and map out all of the things that could go wrong, you would probably never start. So one of the superpowers I think most entrepreneurs have is the ability to understand the risk, and then even at high times of stress, to have a steady hand at the wheel. So, your team looks towards you to be that steady state when all things are maybe falling apart around you. Like, I'll give you a good example. Like, if you have a severity one production issue
Mm.
with your system and your systems are down and you are affecting your customers, it is really important at that point not to panic. And there's a lot on the line. There's a lot of risk of not resolving the issue quickly. But you have to have that mental fortitude to guide the team to a resolution, and then go back and figure out what went wrong and do a 5 whys analysis, all of that good stuff. So yes, Rick, to answer your question, entrepreneurship is a tremendous amount of risk. Look, especially if you have a family, if you're
Yep.
not just doing this for yourself, if you're not like 21 and fresh out of school and you have very little to lose, like, I have a family with 3 children, and
Mm-hmm.
a lot of folks depend on me
Yep.
for an income. So you like, and this isn't my first startup. Like, we've been through many companies and we've sold a few. So it's a little bit easier now in my stage of life. I'm almost 50,
Mm-hmm.
but certainly like in that kind of middle period, maybe before you've seen a first success, there's a lot of risk associated with entrepreneurship. And again, like, if you take the time to tally it all up, it probably is a fool's errand. But some people do it,
Some
and
people
I
do
think
it.
it's those folks that are able to kind of push aside the risk and really focus on just baby steps to success are the ones that can ultimately see the task through.
Lots of people on this call would be taking very close note of what you're sharing, and I wonder what your view of keeping a positive mindset in your days, regardless. What do you say about mindset?
Yeah, you cannot be a pessimist. If you want to start your own thing, the glass has to be always half full,
Hmm.
even when there's not a lot going your way. Like, there are going to be times where you're not going to be able to make payroll, or you're very close to not making payroll, where raising money seems like futile, like just no one's going to write a check. especially in this economic time that we have coming up,
Oh
where
yeah.
VC is going to dry up pretty quickly. You are going to have some hard times. Sorry, absolutely, and it's really important to keep a constant positive mindset for yourself and for your team, because if you start to doubt yourself, your team is going to start to doubt you, and then the whole structure can collapse.
Kind of like the bad apple in the barrel, isn't it? No, we've got a lot of entrepreneurs on the show, and they're startups. They don't have the same level of experience as you do. I'm wondering, what platform would you suggest to them to get involved with in the future?
Technology platforms, Rick,
Yeah,
or do you mean?
yeah,
Yes.
technology platform.
So I think it's a pretty standard process to, as you're building your idea, your concept.
Mm.
There's kind of a school of thought around what's called a lean startup, which is do as little as possible in terms of heavy lifting to get your idea in front of customers as quickly as possible. In other words, don't build for 2 years and then show a potential customer something. Start with a basic idea. Maybe you just have mock-ups. Maybe it's just on paper. Maybe it's on a Figma. Figma is like a prototyping platform that
Yeah,
allows you to
yeah,
create. Just do a Figma, get in front of customers, even if you don't know them, and then you'll have like a couple of response. You'll have I didn't know I need this, but now that you're describing it to me, this sounds great, or this is all rubbish. This is the reason why it doesn't solve my problem, and you'll get like
what you need.
good detailed feedback. Now, either answer is a fantastic feedback loop for you, because you either know you're on the right track, or you know that you have to go back to the drawing board and you're not really solving the problem. Entrepreneurship is about solving a market problem where a solution doesn't currently exist. The more experience you have in the industry that you're tackling, the more you know about the detailed pain and friction that they have in that industry. Like, I couldn't come up with a solution for healthcare. I've never worked in healthcare. However, if you ask me about cloud automation, well, that's kind of been my life for years and years. So I can talk to the pains of that set of issues for hours.
Yeah.
So I would say my recommendation would be, find something you're passionate in and have enough experience in to understand where the true pain points are. That's kind of bullet number one. And number two, if you haven't read the Lean Startup, you should. But start early by showing customers what you got as quickly as possible. Because the last thing you want to do is, let's say you raise some money. Even if you raise $1 million, just pulling it out of the hat.
Yep.
And you're 20% off, like you build 20% of the features that nobody needs. Well, that's $200,000 of capital that you've wasted.
Yeah.
Wouldn't it be much better to get that feedback on day 30 of prototypes versus 6 months into it?
Yeah, a lot of people build without really knowing the data behind the need, don't they?
Absolutely. You've got to know what the pain is. You got to know what the problem that you're solving is. And then once you know what the problem you're solving is, what you're going to get out of that is a TAM, a total addressable market. And the size of the TAM will dictate the opportunity and the potential for the business 5, 7, 10 years down the road, right? And as an entrepreneur, you want to try to find the largest TAM you can, so the largest addressable market, for a problem that you can absolutely capture and influence and make a difference in.
You talked about your longevity in cloud automation. I'd love to switch gears if we could now, Leon, and talk about that. But I think for context, it's going to be important to share with those who are on the call today who don't know anything about this particular industry, and they don't maybe even know how it's going to benefit, if it can benefit their business. Tell us about the genesis of both cloud computing, what it is, and its relationship to AI.
Yeah, absolutely. So a lot of parallel development came in here, but if you go back to 2006, I think it was around 2006, Amazon had this brilliant idea of saying, look, we use a lot of computers in our business. Why don't we carve that portion of our business out and call it infrastructure as a service? So IaaS is the acronym. And so we'll start with very basic primitives. Let's rent people computers that they can rent by the hour, let's say. It's actually by the minute. And let's rent them storage. And maybe with these two primitives, folks can build applications in the cloud, in our data centers, which ends up being the cloud, that they can then leverage without having to order their own hardware and rent their own space and cooling, and all of that overhead associated with launching computer systems. And so that was the genesis, and it was a brilliant idea. You had hosting providers before, like you had things that you could go get a cPanel and rent a couple of computers, but with
Yep.
AWS, it was the first time you could do it en masse at large scale, and you could do it through an API call. And that was the most important thing. You could programmatically order infrastructure as you need it and shut it down when you don't need it.
When you don't need
And
it.
that was the genesis of the cloud. And then in further years, Google followed, and Microsoft followed, and then others followed. But there are 3 or 4 major, what are called IaaS players, that own the vast majority of the market, and those are the players that I mentioned. And now you can get all kinds of services. It's not just computers and storage. You can get all kinds of higher order services from the cloud, but the principle is the same. It's pay as you go, get billed just for the portion of the service that you use, and you can shut it down at any time and bring costs to zero. That's the basic idea.
This kind of explains why I see a lot of these small software organizations, startup SaaS organizations, relying on AWS. When you do your research into the platforms they're using, it's often AWS, isn't it?
Absolutely. And like when we started Cast, which is our current startup, we started it in 2 clouds, so Google and AWS. And the genesis for the Cast idea actually came from the last startup that I had called Zenedge, that we founded. Very similar founding team, 3 of us. And we were building a web application security product, so an enterprise security product, but we hosted it all in the cloud. And it was very compute and bandwidth intensive. And so we had our instances all over the world in every AWS data center. And so the product was really well received by the market and analysts, and and the investors had a great exit. We ended up selling the business to Oracle.
Yep.
But we had one massive friction point, Rick. Every single month when the cloud bill would show up in my email, or our email, accounts payable, I didn't want to see it. My CEO would come into my office and say, "What is going on here? Why is the bill now exponentially increased from last month?" And I'm like, "We signed more customers." And we could never reconcile. So while we were very successful from a product perspective and like as a company, we failed miserably on being able to scale cloud costs to match our input, costs and our sales. And that's a problem that I kind of took with me at the end of that exercise. I'm like, we can't be the only ones who didn't solve it. And that's when we started digging in to the fact that this problem is extremely widespread, and it comes from the genesis of the cloud, the way that responsibility was shifted from financial people to technology people, and that technology people don't really look at the cost as a primary factor for making decisions.
See, this is an evolutionary process, isn't it? You've taken that initial genesis of the cloud computing / AI environment, and now we're moving into the next level, and obviously we're talking about Cast AI today. Now, what do you think is the main value in AI today, and what do you think it's going to turn into in the future? Do you think it's going to be directly linked with robotics and automation? What's the story in your mind, do you think?
Yeah, so AI means a lot of things to a lot of people, so maybe I can just kind of break it down. Today, so in the 90s, we kind of had a bit of a stall out in this field of AI called machine learning. So the idea is that can machines learn very complex factors with lots of input values? Can it recognize images? Can it recognize voices? Can it look at sophisticated financial models and recognize patterns in those models? And so back in the early days of machine learning, the answer was no, because we didn't have the computing power to effectively create these models. If you fast forward about 10, 15 years, we had a renaissance, and machine learning really took off in a big way. So all kinds of models were created, and what really helped was the open source community. All of a sudden, we started getting open source packages. They weren't proprietary to any individual organization or company that any scientist could use, in any institution. So like, for example, like a few years ago, Google open sourced what's called TensorFlow. It was a massive improvement in distributed machine learning. We have technologies like Spark, Apache Spark today. We have PyTorch. There are many open source packages that the machine learning and data science community have learned to use to vastly accelerate the machine learning process. And so machine learning has been used effectively to solve simple model tasks, like, for example, facial recognition or image recognition. It's been used to solve business problems like forecasting and pattern matching and product matching. So there are models being used in almost every serious enterprise. Like if you open your Netflix and you see a set of recommendations for you, Rick, that's likely a machine learning model that's taking a bunch of your attributes into account while it makes those recommendations.
Yeah, I can see it. I can see the wide expanse of possibilities here. It's very exciting, but it could also be somewhat scary and daunting for those who are inexperienced with it. Do you see any consequences as a result of this wonderful technology?
So what I described was a very kind of gated form of AI called machine learning, right? And that's you train a model, it ingests a bunch of data, it produces a prediction, right? There's a great sitcom on HBO called Silicon Valley, and they had this famous AI episode where the engineer was supposed to train a model to recognize different fast food products, and all he could get it to do was to recognize a hot dog or not a hot dog. So they call it the hot dog, not hot dog episode. But so that's a very safe and ethically non-controversial form of machine learning. In fact, like if you look at there's a team in the UK, I believe, called Alpha, and they've produced a number of very interesting models to play the Go board game, which is an ancient board game that was played in Asia. They've produced models to play video games like StarCraft that have beat some of the most interesting professional players. So the way that they're training those models, and it's all based on similar techniques that I just mentioned previously, they are doing an amazing job. But ethically, there's not a lot of controversy.
That's good.
Where the controversy starts is when we start to approach general AI. And I haven't heard a lot of consensus of whether that's 50 years from now, 100 years from now, but general AI starts to map functionality that's closer to the human brain, meaning we don't think in borders of specific models. Like we have a bunch of neurons that work together to think creatively. And that's where we haven't been able to get computers to do. Essentially, even the most sophisticated machine learning or AI models like Siri or your Google Assistant, these are just a combination of models and heuristics that produce something that looks like and speaks like a human being, but is really not unable to pass what's called the Turing test.
Yeah.
Rick, are you familiar with the Turing test?
I've actually heard about it, but I don't know much detail.
So there was a computer scientist, Alan Turing. He devised a hypothesis that said, if we had one human on one side of a wall and a computer on the other side of the wall, the computer is deemed to pass the Turing test if it can hold a conversation with the human, and the human doesn't know it's speaking to a computer.
Right.
And there are competitions annually around these Turing tests, like chatbots, essentially, and people have gotten pretty clever, but we still are not close to having that general artificial intelligence. Now, as we approach general AI, let's say over the next 100 years or so, we are going to have to think about the ethics, because many people fear that, like in Terminator and many of these other science fiction movies, that general AI can escape its sandbox and start to think on its own, and eventually believe that human beings are an unneeded portion of this world, and then we get into kind of a apocalypse-like scenario.
Yeah, wow, that's a really interesting take on it. Thank you for sharing. There's just so much we could talk about now. I'm wondering if we could shift gears again and talk about CastAI and the work that you are doing with your wonderful team. You've got a lot of great skilled people that I'm looking here at your About Us page. Tell us a little bit about, I guess, the core competencies of CastAI and how it delivers its solutions.
Sure. So in entering the business, we made a couple of bets. So here's the principal bet for the business. So and the addressable market is essentially the entire cloud market. So the first bet that we made is that applications. Well, actually, let me step back. The first bet we made is we don't have enough engineers on this planet to nearly do all of the work required for all the application modernization and all the things that we want to build as a society. We do not have enough engineers for those tasks. So we're constantly going to be short on people. The second principle is that modern applications are going to be bundled in these things called containers. And for those folks that are listening that don't know what a container is, think of it as a really small computer, like you can fit 100 of these containers or 200 containers on a laptop, as an example.
Mm-hmm.
And so these containers are a very convenient bundling source and way of deploying. And we believe that in 5 to 7 years, all enterprises from banking to healthcare to insurance, everyone is going to be using this technology as a mechanism for deploying their software, their applications. And then if the first two premises are true, the third premise is there needs to be a system that orchestrates all of these things. So can move containers around, manage their life cycle, make sure they're healthy, and so forth. And there's a system that's kind of the clear winner in that space. It's called Kubernetes. Kubernetes is it's a Greek term for navigator, I believe. And the software, the technology came from Google. They open sourced it. It used to be called Borg, their Borg system. Resistance is futile, but I think they renamed it from a branding perspective, and it's become the clear winner for this container, what we call container orchestration platform. And then, if those three things are true that I just mentioned, and everyone is going to kind of adopt some flavor of Kubernetes, and all of the major cloud providers have an offering for this now, then my contention and my thesis is that we need because there are no engineers to manage these things manually, we need a fully autonomous Kubernetes system. We need all of these life cycles to be managed by a robot. We don't want human beings making decisions around the infrastructure choices and what's available in the market. And so, I have vision for 3 pillars of our platform, but the first pillar that we're really attacking is that our customers are wasting a tremendous amount of money in the cloud because they're underutilizing their resources and they're choosing the wrong resources for the job. And that's literally the only and first problem we're solving for our customers is, if you are a container shop and you have Kubernetes, we're going to save you 50, 60, sometimes 70% of your cloud bill without making any commitments up front. And we're doing that all through automation, machine learning, AI, and other sets of heuristics.
That's incredible. Look, this is such a deep topic that we could get into. I'm wondering if you could just very briefly tell us a little bit about your team, and finally, where people can find you to start working with you if they need to know more.
Yeah, so we have a very, our hiring process is one of the most important things in the company. And I truly believe you really need the best people you can find at all times in order to grow and scale a business. And and in our space and technology, that folks are not easy to find. They're hard to find.
Yep.
And especially if there are a lot of folks that may not have the skill set we're looking for, but kind of have the right title. So we go through a lot. I think we go through 20 resumes for every single person that's a serious candidate that we can close. And so we're hiring all of the time. In fact, Rick, I just wanted to mention while I got you, we have a hiring program right now for Ukrainian individuals that live in the Ukraine. So I was born in Odessa, as I told you, which is in the Ukraine. My partner was also there by happenstance, but we really want to help these people. And so what we're offering is, when this conflict is over, if you're in the middle of the conflict and you can't leave, that's fine. We're going to hold a spot for you. Or if you're already out, or if you're a female that happens not to be in the conflict, if you're a qualified engineer, we will help you relocate to a city called Vilnius, which is Lithuania. It's the country very close to the Ukraine, the borders. We're going to pay for your relocation. We're going to figure out the legals, the visas, and all of the immigration work. And we're going to get you 3 months of housing costs to cover you while you immigrate. So we know how hard the immigration process is, and we're opening that offer to all Ukrainian citizens that have the skill set that we're looking for.
That's incredible. They absolutely need our help right now, don't they?
Absolutely. And a lot of folks on my team are taking in refugees and helping families just out of the goodness of their heart. I mean, they're so close. As you know, Poland, Ukraine, there are so many places that are taking in millions of people. And we need to help them. And so this is kind of one mutually beneficial approach that we've thought of to help them. But in general, kind of our philosophy is we provide our teams lots of autonomy. They're really here to solve some of the hardest cloud problems, and versus working for a big company where you might be just a cog in the machine. This really gives you the freedom to explore the space and solve customers' hardest problems.
Yeah, that's great. Now, in closing this wonderful call, and anybody who's on this call today, if you are exposed to the current conflict and you're looking for an opportunity, certainly make sure to reach out to Leon and his team. Now, on that, Leon, can you share with us where people are actually going to connect with you?
Yes, absolutely. So you can find me on LinkedIn. You can just search Leon, Leon Kuperman, Kuperman. You'll find me at CastAI. And then you can actually just go to our website. All of our contact details are there. It's cast.ai, no .com at the end. And we have this really cool free analysis tool. Like, you can install this thing in your Kubernetes cluster, and in a few minutes, it'll tell you upfront, here's how much money we're going to save you as an enterprise, and here's how we're going to do it. So you get all these recommendations at no cost. I'd refer anybody running this environment, you got to try it out. It's going to blow your mind.
You got to try it out. Well, look, make sure you do that. And I'm going to make sure that you've got all the links that you need to get access to Leon and his team at Cast.ai. No matter where you see this post, this call, this interview, you're going to find the links back to Cast.ai. And with that all being said, Leon, this has been a great call. Thank you so very much for joining me on the show today.
Thank you so much, Rick. Great questions, really deep probing.
Thanks for joining us today. If you enjoyed the call, then make sure to subscribe, leave a comment, share us with your friends, and book your spot on the show at myfuturebusiness.com/interviews. And if you're looking for solutions that will help grow your business, then visit myfuturebusiness.com/shop.